onboarding. The next thing you would want to do when you have an account is to create users and assign roles and permissions to these users. This year, we released a new role management feature, and I will do that now. This feature allows you to create roles, which are basically sets of permissions, and then apply or assign them to different users. So for example, we'll create a role that is called Demo Role and add some privileges, like allow purging cache and modifying site settings, and so on. And then we'll click Save. Now that we have the role, we can assign that role to users. So let's go to the users. You select the user, for example, test user, and then you can assign this specific role to the user. We can assign multiple roles to the same user, and you can view the specific roles that a user has. So if we assign the role to the user on the account level, the user will inherit all the permissions on the account and all the sites in their account. However, in some cases, you want to allow users to perform actions only to specific websites. For example, if this user is managing the website, this can be achieved by entering the specific subaccount, which is a collection of sites. And from that subaccount, when you go to the Users tab, you can pull the specific user, like our test user, and assign the role that you just created. This way, all the permissions are given to the user only on the sites under that subaccount, and not on sites under other subaccounts. The next thing we would probably want to do is to manage the settings for our websites. If you're an enterprise customer, you obviously have hundreds or possibly even more. Therefore, you'll want to manage the security in a central place and in a way that applies to all the sites instead of going into each site separately. For this, we've created the policy management feature, which allows you to create a policy and then apply it to sites. You can see that all of these are policies that already exist on the account. We can easily create a new policy by providing a name. We will select the ACL policy, Access Control List policy. Once you press OK, we get all the parameters for the specific type of policy. We can look at countries, for example, and block Africa. We can block specific URLs. We can block IPs. We can set exceptions for the rules that we created in this policy as well. For example, even though we blocked Africa, we can set an exception for Egypt. The exception can be applied to the entire policy, but we can also apply this exception specifically to one or more sites. This way, you can create a generic policy that applies to all sites and still have some correction and tuning per site if you so desire. Once we're done creating all the parameters for the policy, we then decide which sites we want to apply the policy, and we can select one or more sites for this policy. We can also set this policy as default on a subaccount or the entire account. Setting the policy as default on a subaccount means that every site that is created under that subaccount will automatically inherit this policy by default. This is a great feature for DevOps processes when you want the DevOps operations teams to add a site to the right subaccount without worrying about security features. In a way, just by adding the site to the right subaccount, it will get all the default policies that are set for that subaccount. So now we have the new policy set. We can also manage the policy from the specific website by looking at the policy page and by seeing all the policies that are currently applied on the website. We can also apply other policies on that website from the list of the policies that we have on the account and so on. For example, we can manage cache, we can manage delivery, we can manage our WAF settings for the sites. We can decide what happens for a specific type of violation that happens in the backend, such as choosing to block the request, block the user, only alert, block the IP for a certain period of time, etc. We can have that for every type of violation that happens if we want to become granular. We can also create custom rules, which are more complicated and more complex, and can be designed specifically to set the optimal security for our website. Now, I'll show you how to define a custom rule for a case that we've seen in the field with one of our customers. Consider this website. It's a nice website that allows you to purchase a villa, and it has a registered customer option. This option allows you to register as a customer. You have to provide an email address, and you have to provide a password. However, There's still one problem with this site. The password is not limited in its length of characters. And this makes the site vulnerable to DDoS service attacks that can add very large passwords, exhausting the memory of the website or the disk based on the website. Therefore, we are going to protect this customer from this specific risk, as well as reduce the risk of them being attacked by this violation. First of all, we'll use the developer view to get some important information. For starters, we look at the password field in the form and we see that the name of the parameter is password1 and that the URL for the form is shop/auth/register. This is all the information that we actually need, and we can start creating the rule. The way we'll do it is by creating rate rules. By choosing this, we'll count the number of times an IP creates passwords that are too long. So we'll start by adding a counter. Basically, we're setting the criteria for the counter, the number of requests that you want to count. Now we specify the method, which is post for this request. Then we'll make sure that the specific parameter exists. So this is password1, as we saw. All right, and of course, we'll make sure that the URL is correct. This is the URL that we saw before. Okay, to summarize, we set the rule as a counter rule, and it will count the number of times an IP creates a password, counting how many times a specific IP sends a request that matches this parameter. And we'll also add post size. So let's say that the request should not exceed 500 characters, as this is long enough for a password. Altogether, we're checking how many times this specific IP sends long passwords to this specific URL within an interval of, let's say, 30 seconds. So we've set the rule name and we've set the counter. Now what we need to do is add a rule that will use the counter and check its value. This is the counter that we just created. And let's say that we allow it to be no more than 50 times in the 30 seconds time period. Therefore, if a request that we've defined before arrives more than 50 times within 30 seconds, we want to do something, such as alert, block the request, or session of the IP, set a CAPTCHA to make sure that's not a bot, and so on. In this case, let's block the IP and create a rule name. That's it. Now we can say we've created the counter to follow passwords, and we create a rule that blocks the request when an IP sends a long password too many times.